After helping an Imperial pilot who crashed on Tatooine, Luke Skywalker was invited to join the Imperial Academy. He accepted the invitation and quickly excelled as a pilot, attracting the attention of the Empire's top brass, including Darth Vader. After several successful missions, Luke took part in Leia's capture, and during interrogation, he discovered that Vader was his father and ran into his old friend, Ben Kenobi, who revealed the truth about his mission: to train Luke for his true destiny as a Jedi. Obi-Wan looked at Luke with a serene but wise expression. "Luke," he began, "your destiny has always been to become a Jedi Knight, just as your father was. When you impulsively left Tatooine to join the Imperial Academy, fate took you away from me. My mission was to guide you, to train you when the time came, but the Force had other plans. Even so, you still have a chance to follow this path. The call to the Force has never ceased to be with you. Only now the time has come for you to embrace your true destiny." Despite Obi-Wan's words, Luke was reluctant. He looked at Leia and, even though he felt something special around him, shook his head. "I can't do this," he said, his voice tense. "It's too dangerous. The Empire is invincible. No matter what we do, we'll never be able to defeat them. That would be suicide." Fear and doubt filled his mind, an internal battle gripping him between the desire to protect Leia and the need to keep himself safe. Leia, irritated by Luke's lack of initiative, stared at him resolutely. "Your lack of faith is disturbing, Luke," she said firmly. "If everyone thinks like that, the Empire will rule forever. We can't just give up and accept that. Every person who refuses to fight is allowing evil to triumph." The argument between them escalated, with Luke insisting that it was impossible, and Leia trying to convince him that giving up was not an option. Until, suddenly, Obi-Wan intervened, speaking calmly and confidently. "Luke, you must learn to trust the Force." Luke looked at him, confused. "In the Force?" he asked. Obi-Wan took a deep breath before answering. "The Force is what connects all living things. It is in all of us. It connects us to each other and to the universe itself. It flows through everything and gives us power, if we know how to feel it. It is not something we can see or touch, but it is an energy that guides those who are attuned to it. It can amplify your abilities, awaken your intuition, and show you the way even when everything seems uncertain." Obi-Wan continued, watching Luke carefully. "You must have noticed, during your missions as a pilot, that something was guiding you. It was as if a silent voice spoke to you, showing you the way, helping you to anticipate enemy movements and make quick decisions. That feeling of knowing what was going to happen before it actually happened, of sensing danger before it arrived. All this is the Force communicating with you." Luke was silent for a moment, absorbing Obi-Wan's words. "I really felt it," he admitted. "It was like a voice inside my mind, something that made me leave Tatooine and join the Academy. And during the missions, I knew what was going to happen. I could predict the next move. I thought it was just luck, or maybe instinct. But now I see that maybe it was something more." Obi-Wan smiled slightly and replied, "That, Luke, is the Force speaking to you. You must learn to feel it, to trust it, and it will guide you on your path. It's not luck or coincidence. It's the Force that's with you." But even after all Obi-Wan's explanations, Luke seemed stuck in an endless cycle of doubt. "You have no idea what you're up against," he began to say again, in a voice that carried both fear and despair. "The Empire is huge. They have control of everything. We don't stand a chance against such a powerful army." His words echoed the belief of someone who had seen the Empire's overwhelming strength up close, and who found it hard to see any possibility of victory. But before he could continue, the door to his quarters suddenly opened. A stormtrooper entered, but contrary to everyone's expectations, he took off his helmet, revealing something surprising. It was Han Solo. "We need to go now," Han said with urgency in his voice. He was the pilot Obi-Wan had hired to get Leia and the droids out of there. Time was running out fast. "Luke, we won't be able to get out without your help," Obi-Wan insisted, realizing that Han's words only heightened the tension. "We don't have any more time." The options were running out, and escape seemed increasingly impossible. Luke, however, still seemed frozen by fear and doubt. Feeling that he needed one last shot, Obi-Wan faced him squarely and said, "Luke, look at Leia. Don't you notice something different about her?" Confused, Luke shook his head in the affirmative, not really understanding what was going on, but feeling that there was something special about the connection he had with Leia. Then Obi-Wan revealed the truth that would change everything. "She's your sister." The revelation stunned everyone, including Leia. Although she had felt a special connection with Luke from the first moment she saw him, her mind refused to accept this new reality. She stared at Luke's Imperial uniform, still incredulous. "This can't be true," she exclaimed, trying to convince herself that this was some kind of mistake. But Obi-Wan was firm. "You can feel it, Leia. Deep down in your heart. You know I'm telling you the truth." While Luke was still processing everything he had just heard, Han Solo, with his irreverent manner, interrupted. "This family story is pretty exciting, but if we don't get out of here now, there won't be any family left to tell the tale." The urgency in Han's voice broke the moment of tension, bringing everyone back to the reality of the imminent danger. Time was against them, and the window of opportunity to escape was closing fast. Luke looked from Han to Obi-Wan, then to Leia, and finally made a decision. He stood up, with a new determination in his eyes, and said, "Come with me." He felt that it was time to act. Destiny was calling, and now he knew he could no longer run away. Luke, with the new determination he had found, turned to the others and said in a firm tone, "Follow me and don't say anything." Han, understanding the gravity of the situation, put his stormtrooper helmet back on to maintain his disguise. As they walked through the hangar corridors, Han discreetly pointed to where the Millennium Falcon was, now seized by the Empire. When they reached the Millennium Falcon, Luke, with the authority of an Imperial officer, ordered the stormtroopers to move away from the ship. None of them questioned the order, and they all entered the ship without any major problems. Inside, Chewbacca was hiding the whole time, waiting for the moment to escape. As soon as Luke entered, he looked at Han and asked, "How did you manage to escape?" Han, with his typical relaxed air, replied, "Ask your Jedi friend over there." Obi-Wan was the last to enter the ship. As he set foot on the ramp, he stopped suddenly, hearing a familiar voice echoing through the hangar. "Obi-Wan." The voice was deep and menacing. Obi-Wan immediately recognized the presence he had been feeling ever since they arrived at the base. When everyone turned to see who it was, they found Darth Vader activating his fearsome red lightsaber. The menacing sound of the blade made everyone hold their breath for a moment. The stormtroopers who were standing guard around them advanced, ready to attack. But before they could get close, Obi-Wan activated his lightsaber, stunning them with his skill and dexterity. In just a few movements, he neutralized all the Imperial soldiers with impressive precision. Vader then addressed Luke. "Don't do this, Luke. Together, we will be indestructible." But Obi-Wan quickly interrupted. "Get inside the ship, Luke." He signaled for Han to start taking off, and then advanced towards Vader, ready to confront him. Leia, distressed, said to Han, "Wait." Han had no choice but to raise the ramp of the Millennium Falcon. However, Vader held out his hand, using the Force to prevent the ramp from closing completely. At that moment, Obi-Wan realized what he had to do. In an act of sacrifice, he advanced against Vader, engaging him in a lightsaber duel. The sound of sabers echoed through the hangar as the two fought. Obi-Wan skillfully directed his movements to push Vader away from the Millennium Falcon, giving the ship room to take off. When they were almost ready to escape, Obi-Wan said calmly, "If you strike me down, I should become more powerful than you could possibly imagine." And then, in a moment of deep connection with the Force, Obi-Wan disappeared, becoming one with the energy that guided all the Jedi. Luke and Leia watched it all from the window of the Millennium Falcon's rear compartment, in shock. The image of Obi-Wan disappearing in front of them left a deep mark, especially on Luke, who realized the sacrifice that had been made for him. Obi-Wan knew that this would be the definitive stimulus for Luke to embrace his destiny as a Jedi. Luke's journey to become a Jedi Knight had finally begun. Luke and Leia sat on the Millennium Falcon, completely bewildered by what had just happened. Obi-Wan's sacrifice weighed heavily on them, and the feeling that everything had changed in an instant left them silent. While trying to process what had happened, Luke felt something stuck in his uniform. Curious, he pulled out an object, a lightsaber. Without him realizing it, Obi-Wan had put the saber in his pocket before he entered the ship. What Luke didn't yet know was that this was no ordinary lightsaber, but the lightsaber that had belonged to his father, Anakin Skywalker. Holding it in his hands, he felt an even greater emotional weight, as if part of his destiny were there, within his grasp. Shortly afterwards, Han Solo, always practical and direct, broke the silence by asking, "What now? Where should I leave you to collect my reward?" Leia, still shaken by the latest events, gave the location of the rebel base, a safe place where R2-D2 could be taken with vital information about the Death Star. However, before any decision could be made, Luke clearly heard Obi-Wan's voice in his mind. "Dagobah. You must go to Dagobah." He was surprised by the clarity of the message, and before he could explain, Leia also suggested that they should follow their intuition. Their destiny seemed to be sealed when they finally reached the mysterious, swampy planet of Dagobah. Han Solo was the first to show his displeasure. "What is this place? We're in the middle of nowhere," he complained, while observing the inhospitable conditions around them. However, it wasn't long before a small green being appeared among the trees. He walked slowly towards them, and the three of them looked at him curiously. The being introduced himself simply as Yoda. Chewbacca quickly came forward and greeted him warmly, showing that they already knew each other and putting everyone at ease. Sensing that the Force was powerful in both of them, he commented, "You have been guided here by the Force." Then he asked them what had happened. Intrigued that he had spoken about the Force, Leia and Luke looked at each other, and Leia, feeling an inexplicable trust in that small being, identified herself and briefly told Yoda about Obi-Wan's sacrifice, the duel with Darth Vader, and the crucial information that was contained in R2-D2 about the Empire's secret weapon, the Death Star. Yoda, after listening attentively, suggested that the two remain there to receive training as Jedi. Luke, still confused by everything that was happening, began to understand that his destiny was deeply linked to the Force, and that was the place where he needed to be to discover his true potential. Leia, on the other hand, was hesitant. She knew that the information on R2-D2 was vital to the survival of the Rebel Alliance. "We need to get this information to the Rebel base as quickly as possible," said Leia, concerned at the urgency of the situation. Yoda, however, insisted that there was something bigger at stake. "Together, you can defeat not only the Death Star, but also Vader, the Emperor, and the entire Empire," he said, with the wisdom of one who knew the ways of the Force like no other. Luke, realizing the weight of responsibility, interrupted with a suggestion. "Han Solo can take R2-D2 to the Rebel base and collect his reward. We'll leave the location with him, and then we can continue our training here." Han, initially reluctant, eventually agreed to the plan, knowing that his part in the mission was complete. With that, R2-D2 was sent to the Rebel base, and Luke and Leia, somewhat reluctantly, stayed there to begin their training as Jedi, ready to face the fate that awaited them. As soon as Han Solo, Chewbacca, and the droids left for the Rebel base, Leia turned to Yoda and asked, with a slight trepidation in her voice, "Why should I stay here and be trained?" Obi-Wan only talked about Luke, as if he were the only one with this destiny. Leia, always practical and objective, couldn't understand why her presence was essential in that remote place. She knew that Luke had a connection to the Force, but she didn't see the same potential in herself. Yoda, sensing Leia's doubts, decided to tell Anakin's story in more detail, something Obi-Wan hadn't had time to do. "Your father, Anakin Skywalker, the Chosen One, was from an ancient prophecy. He was begotten by the Force itself, destined to bring balance to it," explained Yoda. "But instead of fulfilling that destiny, seduced by the dark side, he went, becoming Darth Vader." Yoda looked at Luke and Leia with an air of deep wisdom. "The heirs to that legacy you two are. The Force flows strongly in both of you, for you carry the same blood as Anakin. Your destiny, Leia, is as important as Luke's." Yoda went on to explain about the fateful Order 66, the fall of the Jedi and the need to separate them at birth to protect them from the Emperor. It was my idea to separate you, so that you would not be found and destroyed, Yoda revealed with an expression of regret. But now, the Force has brought you together, and that is no coincidence. You have a responsibility that goes beyond destroying the Death Star. The fate of the galaxy lies in the hands of the two of you to restore the balance that Anakin failed to achieve. Leia began to understand the depth of her role, feeling the weight of her lineage. Yoda then spoke about the unique skills that each had acquired throughout their lives. Leia, your political experience and leadership are as important as Luke's piloting skills and strategy. Together, with the knowledge of Jedi philosophy and the Force, you can become unbeatable, even against the Emperor and Vader. Luke looked at Leia with an expression of renewed understanding. They both now knew that, as siblings, they were the key to defeating the evil that threatened the galaxy. But well-trained you will need to be, young Skywalkers, concluded Yoda. Leia, now more confident, smiled slightly and looked at Luke as if he had finally accepted the path ahead of them. Then the training began in earnest. Yoda, despite his frail appearance and advanced age, showed surprising wisdom and agility. He interspersed deep lessons about the Force with rigorous physical exercise. Luke and Leia were constantly challenged to explore their limits, both physically and mentally. The Force is not just an energy you feel, Yoda taught, it is a field that permeates all living things. To master it, you must first master yourself. These words echoed in their minds as they ran through the dense forest, leaping between the trees. Lightsaber combat became a fundamental part of their training. Yoda taught Luke and Leia to feel the movements of the Force in every blow, every block, connecting their actions with the invisible flow around them. Luke, already familiar with weapons, showed a certain ease in learning the movements, but Leia, who had never handled a saber before, had more difficulty. The two, like siblings, helped each other, realizing that only together could they reach the full potential that Yoda saw in them. While the physical training exhausted them, Yoda also guided the Skywalker brothers in deep meditation, teaching them to connect with the Force in ways they had never imagined. Silence within, you must find, Yoda would say, as he led them through breathing and concentration exercises. Luke, used to action, initially struggled to silence his agitated mind, but gradually learned to listen to the Force in the midst of chaos. Leia, on the other hand, had an easier time and found meditation a way to access her own intuition and leadership, realizing that her role in the galactic conflict went beyond political battles. During lightsaber battles, Yoda often reminded them that the Force should not be used for aggression, but for defense. A Jedi does not seek a fight, he would repeat. But when conflict is inevitable, it is the Force that guides your movements. Luke and Leia practiced tirelessly, blocking imaginary attacks, feeling every vibration around them. They began to develop almost superhuman reflexes, anticipating each other's moves before they even executed them. Yoda watched in satisfaction, seeing how the Force flowed through the two of them. As the training progressed, Yoda began to test not only their physical abilities, but also their capacity to face fear and doubt. One day, he took Luke and Leia into a dark and mysterious cave. "Here, your fears shall face you," he said with a serious tone. Luke entered first, followed by Leia. Inside the cave, disturbing visions confronted them, images of Vader, the Empire, the destruction of Alderaan, and their own failures. It was a test of emotional endurance, where they both had to trust in the Force and not be overwhelmed by the shadows of the dark side. As time passed, Luke and Leia began to understand the depth of what they were learning. The training wasn't just about fighting or using the lightsaber, but about developing an intimate connection with the Force, which would guide each of their decisions in the future. They were becoming stronger, more confident, and, above all, more united. Through training with Yoda, the Skywalker siblings were finally beginning to understand the true purpose of their destinies: to restore the balance of the Force that their father, Anakin, had failed to maintain. As the training continued and became more intense, Yoda intentionally began to test Luke and Leia's deepest fears and insecurities. For Leia, concern for the rebels and the fate of the Alliance began to consume her thoughts. During moments of meditation and even in combat, she found herself distracted, wondering if the attack on the Death Star had been successful or if her companions were in danger. Did they succeed? She constantly asked herself, letting her mind wander away from there. Luke, sensing his sister's worries, tried to reassure her. He reminded her to trust in the Force and the training they were receiving. Although Luke also had his doubts, he knew that, at that moment, his focus needed to be on Leia and on helping her to stand firm. Yoda, observing this growing connection between the two, began to understand that the bond between Luke and Leia was much deeper and more unusual than he had initially thought. He realized that they shared more than just a blood bond. There was a natural harmony between the two that made them extremely effective together. It was then that Yoda decided to change his approach to training. He began to train them as one. Luke and Leia now had to anticipate each other's movements, working together as if they were extensions of the same entity. When one attacked, the other defended. When one hesitated, the other compensated for the weakness. This new approach meant that their progress accelerated exponentially. With each exercise, Luke and Leia became more in sync, their skills complementing each other almost instinctively. Yoda watched intently, pleased with his pupil's development. "United, you are stronger," he would say, reinforcing that their power lay not only in their individual abilities, but in the connection between them. Yoda's lessons were not just about technique, but also about the trust and balance that the two needed to maintain in order to become the Jedi that destiny demanded. With this new dynamic, Luke and Leia's learning curve intensified even further. Yoda, with his vast wisdom, realized that the potential of the two of them together was greater than he had initially anticipated. They were moving beyond expectations, overcoming the challenges the Force imposed on them with a rare harmony. Their physical, mental, and spiritual training was progressing rapidly, and Yoda knew that, when the time was right, they would be ready to face the challenges that the future held. The Force had chosen them for a greater mission, and now they were getting closer to fulfilling that destiny. Then, on a quiet day of training, a rebel pilot landed in a clearing, bringing grim news. He informed Luke, Leia, and Yoda that the planned attack on the Death Star had failed. "I'm the only survivor," he said, his eyes downcast, clearly shaken by the loss of his companions. The worst was yet to come. He explained that the Empire was using the Death Star to launch a series of devastating attacks on strategic Rebel Alliance targets, destroying entire planets and further weakening the resistance. Now, more than ever, the Alliance needed Luke and Leia's help. The pilot highlighted the importance of Luke's skills as a pilot and strategist, as well as his detailed knowledge of Imperial tactics. The news was a blow to Luke. He knew he was perhaps the best pilot the Empire had ever trained, and now, with Yoda's teachings on the Force and Jedi philosophy, he was more powerful than ever. However, one doubt remained. Were he and Leia really ready to face the magnitude of this mission? Destroying the Death Star would be no easy task, and there was also the threat of Darth Vader and the Emperor himself. Luke felt the weight of responsibility growing on his shoulders, but he knew he couldn't run away. He looked at Leia, who was equally worried, but determined to fight for the rebel cause. Luke looked at Leia, his heart racing, trying to find the right words. The rebel pilot waited anxiously, hoping for an answer, knowing that time was running out. Yoda's teachings resonated in Luke's mind, but he couldn't ignore the approaching danger. The Death Star was continuing its path of destruction, and every minute lost could mean more innocent lives sacrificed. Leia, by his side, felt the same internal conflict. Her loyalty to the rebels and to the future of the galaxy clashed with the uncertainties of facing such a powerful enemy. The silence between the three of them was fraught with tension. The humid wind blew lightly as the two brothers, now deeply connected by the Force, exchanged glances. Were they really ready to face the fate that awaited them? The call to action was clear, but the journey ahead seemed increasingly perilous. Luke knew he couldn't put off the decision for much longer, but the weight of the choice still held them in its grip. Yoda, observing the indecision, closed his eyes and waited patiently. He knew that, whatever the choice, Luke and Leia's fate was intertwined with the Force in a way that he himself could not yet fully predict. Time seemed to drag on while the answer hung in the air, unspoken but inevitable.